Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. I am Blake Cush. I'm the Training and Outreach Unit Chief here at OVS, and I have the privilege of welcoming you to our Training and Technical Assistance Request Program, or TARP as we call it, relaunch webinar. So today we're going to cover a few things regarding how the program works, the history of it, and then our partners from the Institute for CUNY Institute for State and Local Governance is going to actually lead us on a demo training as well. So I'm delighted to have all of you join us. We are a couple housekeeping things. We have closed captioning enabled. You just click the live transcript or the CC icon at the bottom of your screen. So if you need that, that's available to you. Slides for today's webinar are also available, and we'll share a link with that in the chat so you can access those at any time. And then at the end of the training, we encourage you to complete the evaluation form that is sent out as well, so you can kind of give us feedback on how it worked. So before I take back over and do a little bit of history of TARP and how the program has worked or how we kind of came to where we are, I have the privilege to introduce our director, Elizabeth Cronin, who's going to share some welcome remarks.
Thanks, Blake. Well, that's an old haircut. You always have to be changing. So welcome, everyone. I'm so excited to be here, to be part of this announcement of the relaunch of our Training and Technical Assistance Request Program. This is one of the most popular programs that is offered through OVS. It's something that is really customizable for programs. We listen to what your needs are and then do our best to be able to respond with appropriate support, whether it's training, whether it's one-on-one coaching, whatever the programs need. I think we've got over 160 people participating today, and I'm happy to say that we have some of our new programs who recently came into the OVS family after the most recent RFA. And, we're particularly interested in hearing from the new programs what you think you'll be needing, since this is sort of a new experience of working with the Office of Victim Services. So I'm equally thrilled to introduce the consultants that we're working with on our TTARP program, the CUNY Institute for State and Local Governance. We got some very, very good applications, but the Institute's program really stood out to us, and we're very excited to get them launched and get this program started and see all the amazing things that they're going to be doing with our funded programs. So welcome to all of you, and Blake, I'll turn it back to you.
Awesome, thank you. So you advance next. There you go. So here's our agenda, as I mentioned or sort of teased earlier. We're going to talk this training is broken into two separate phases, and or parts. First, it's going to be really all about the nuts and bolts of the TARP program, how it works, some of the history, like I mentioned before. And then we'll actually get into how to submit your own requests, which the catalog is open and live, and the requests are being accepted now, actually as of October 31st. So we'll go over some of that. And then after that, as a mini session, developing meaningful survivor engagement models. And it'll be a nice way for you to sort of see and be teased into sort of the potential training and offerings or technical assistance that you could receive as a result of working through this program. Next slide, please. So you can go one more. What is TARP and how did it begin? This sort of was a brainchild that was replicated after the training OVC, which is the Office for Victims of Crime Training and Technical Assistance Center. And they have a program which is still used today for state administrating agencies and crime victim service providers to apply for and receive free training and technical assistance. And sometimes too, they'll offer just random trainings based on a demand or a need. And we thought back in 2017 and 2018, with the use of some of our discretionary training funds that we had, well, why don't we pilot it and try it as well? And so we did for about 6 months. We did a pilot program, and it was tremendously successful. The feedback was through the roof. People loved it. And we thought, all right, well, we should definitely do this again. So we did it again in 2019. And then COVID happened and it changed everything. And so what the program had initially been intended for sort of morphed into a more hybrid or virtual training program. And I think the needs were still met as best they could, given the circumstances that we all sort of went through over these last couple of years. So there were, in the course of these last iterations, there were probably more than 100, 150 requests that have been processed, and thousands of people who've been trained through this training and technical assistance request program. Next slide. That led to this renewal, which is where we're at now, and the partners that we brought on now for another multi-year iteration of it. And we sort of see the value in continuing this as long as we can, should funding be available. So what is it in a nutshell? It is customized, and that's key too, no cost training and technical assistance pairing service for all of OVS funded programs, or OVS funded programs are eligible to apply for the service. And the key words here are customized and no cost. And we had a lot of programs who found out after the program had ended, or the pilot program had ended, that, oh, this was really free. And it was thousands and thousands of dollars that we were sort of like saying, yes, there's a lot of money available to you guys to be able to use to help improve your programs wherever you see them fit, not necessarily what's being, deemed important to us. It's what's important to you. So that's what's unique about it, is it is customized, it's free, and it's the parent service where we actually match you with consultants, or our consultants will match you with the appropriate subject matter experts. We know a lot of you face uncertain futures, and there are many, many operation challenges that are not just unique to crime victim services, but unique to the nonprofit world or to the local and governments and state governments. Sometimes we understand that those are super unique, and that the solutions to some of those challenges require unique approaches. So that led to the RFA we issued earlier this year, or last year actually, and then the eventual contract that we we're able to land with our partners here with the Institute for State and Local Governance, and they have been tremendous to work with in leading up to today's sort of launch. This is the culmination of many months of work, and I can't thank Rachel Gentili, who's on here right now, enough for all of her work. She wrote this RFA and actually processed everything to get. She led us to where we are today. And then, of course, Allison Diegas and Taylor for all of their work getting us into this point where it was able to actually have a catalog and have the evaluations ready and all of these tools that sort of make the program what it is. They wouldn't have been possible without everybody who you're going to meet and sort of learn more about here shortly. But that's the history of it. That's sort of how we ended up today. And now I'm going to pass it over to Rachel, who's going to talk to you a little more about some of the additional components.
Thank you, Blake. So I'm Rachel Gentili. I'm a program outreach specialist in the training and outreach unit at OVS. Many of you, if you've ever received an email from training, it's probably me. So it's very nice to meet all of you. I'm going to go over just a bit of what TARP is, and soon you will not hear from us. We will get you to the real deal people. We'll get you to Taylor and Zareen so that you can actually get some real good content. But once again, I have to say TARP is made up of two main components. The first and most major component is this customized training and technical assistance. You're going to hear us say this a lot. It's free, it's customizable, it's for you. You can really build something that is specific to your program and the problems you face and the opportunities you're hoping to build upon. So it is totally, totally customizable for what you need. I would like to say that these programs are really focused on running your program more efficiently and effectively. If you're looking for training or help running your grant or specific questions about the OVS compensation process, we do offer trainings on those, but those you'll reach out to your contract manager for those kind of trainings. This is more how to run the program better. If you're looking on how to work with OVS better, you'll reach out to your contract manager and they'll help connect you with that kind of training. And I hear that there is an echo, and I think it might be my phone. Hold on one second. I'm going to see if I can get something better. I might not. We'll find out. Is that any better or no? I don't know if I can get it clearer, unfortunately.
I think you're
Okay,
good.
I'm going to keep going, and I apologize for anybody who has a bad audio connection. So the other part of what we offer is a webinar series. So periodically throughout the course of this contract, we'll be offering larger scale webinars, sort of like this, or the second part of this training, which will be more general information that any of our funded programs can come to. Obviously, those will be less customized, but they are another offering that ISLG will be able to offer for you all. We want to talk about the catalog of services. So the main piece of information you're going to interact with in using TARP is the catalog of services. This is essentially all the information you'll need in order to understand the program, submit a request, and select what you might want to do. The catalog has an overview of the types of trainings that ISLG can provide. They've broken them up into purpose areas, which they'll describe in a bit more detail, but it really tells you here's sort of the area, here's some examples of training. You can use that as a springboard for what you specifically need. It also provides an overview of the available modalities of training that are offered, and all of the offerings can be customized to meet your needs. If you see something that is sort of it, but you want to dial something up or down, ask for that during the program, the proposal development. You'll be able to dial it exactly to what you need. Regarding eligibility for this program, we do want to make it clear that this is eligible only to OVS-funded victim assistance programs. We're unable to offer it beyond that scope at this time. And as far as submitting, at this time, only program executive directors or directors are able to actually submit the program. Now, they can say that there's a different project lead, and that's totally fine, but as far as making sure that each program director is aware of the funding opportunities and trainings that are coming into their program, it does need to be submitted by them. And then our target audience are VAP staff, boards of directors, volunteers. Anyone who's interacting with your program is eligible to take part in and be a part of these trainings. The exact audience is dependent on the specific project. So again, it's not one size fits all. Next slide. And a really brief overview of the process of TARP. So a VAP program director or executive director realizes that there's a problem or an opportunity to grow in their program. They submit a TARP request form via SurveyMonkey. They look at the catalog of services, they write down what they need. This goes directly to OVS. OVS will review the request for eligibility. So, is it a funded program? Is the person a program director, executive director, and is the request complete? We get a lot of incomplete requests. Make sure if you're submitting a request, you do click that done button. That's how it will come over to us. Once we do that initial eligibility, we forward it to ISLG and say, here you go, here's a program request. Work with them and create a proposal. ISLG will then reach out to you. They'll develop the project proposal in collaboration with you. That generally takes about 5 to 15 business days, give or take, depending on the scope of the program. It might take a little longer, might be really quick. OVS will review that proposal, will give a final approval, and then you'll know that your project has been approved when you receive a formal email with an attached letter. The letter will say that it's been approved, what it's called, and then you'll also receive your final proposal. So you'll see what has been approved for ISLG to work with. And then it's between you and ISLG to implement that project. OVS isn't really involved in this portion unless we're needed, but ISLG will work with you to complete the project proposal as it's been outlined and approved. And then the last thing that you have to do is, as a part of your participation in this program, it is a requirement that everyone who partakes in the training does complete an evaluation survey within 1 week of the program taking place. I'll be happy to let you know that it should only take about 2 to 5 minutes. It's not super involved, but it's really important for us to know, how did it go? How did you find it? Are there other opportunities? And ISLG is continuously updating and reviewing their catalog of services to make sure that it's appropriate and applicable to our VAPs. So that's enough of me talking, and I will be happy to pass it over to ISLG, who will introduce themselves, speak more about the program, and then jump into their mini training. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rachel. And I want to just say before we jump into the rest, how wonderful it is to be at this table and to work with you all over the coming years. This is such an exciting initiative, and we're really excited to be a part of it. On the screen, you have some faces and names. We wanted to put faces to names. This is the core TARP team at ISLG. We're a much larger institute. So there may be some other folks that get pulled in depending on the form of TA or whatever the needs might be. But I'm Allison, I'm a program director. Talon, you'll be meeting in a moment, who's leading up the initiative. And then we have Kristen, Zareen, and Neil, who is also working across the research component and pulling together the trainings themselves. So to tell you a little bit about who ISLG is, so we're the CUNY Institute for State and Local Governance, and we're an institute within the City University of New York and a good governance think and do tank, which was founded in 2014. While we're based in New York City, we do work throughout the city level at a national level. So within New York City and then other cities across the country, as well as at the state level, both within New York State and nationally across the country. And we work closely with the provider community, with government agencies, and with the communities themselves in thinking about solutions and solving different problems and challenges. And then we work across a number of different policy areas, which include the criminal justice field, gender-based violence, and the broader community safety approaches. And then we utilize a number of strategic approaches in understanding what those challenges are, designing solutions and interventions to those challenges. And then a big part of that involves building partnerships or developing infrastructure that's needed within an organization or within a government agency to actually solve those challenges and implement those interventions. We're incredibly excited to work with you and learn more about you and tell you more about us over our coming years together. But I will now pass the mic to Talon to chat more about this initiative and answer any questions you may have.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Allison. I'm very excited to be here. Like Allison said, my name is Talon Stalting. I'm a policy associate at ISLG, and I'm kind of heading up this project, which I'm really excited about. I have worked out of a victim assistance program in the past in New York City, so I know what it's like on the ground, and I'm really excited to continue working with VAPs in this new capacity. So we're going to first just kind of dive a little bit more into the catalog of services. I'll also say if you have any questions or anything, please feel free to drop them in the chat or in the Q&A function, and we'll be sure to kind of pause periodically to answer any of those questions that pop up. So one of the first things that you'll see in the catalog of services is information on the various modalities that we have. So all the trainings that you'll see in the catalog of services that we'll get more into detail in a minute can be used with any of those modalities, including a hybrid. We recognize that, sometimes a training is not enough by itself, but maybe a training followed by coaching sessions or whatever it might be. All of these modalities are, again, like Rachel really highlighted, are going to be customized to what you need. So for trainings, if you need more kind of lecture, then that's going to be the focus of it. If you want more discussion, that's going to be the focus of it. It's really up to what you need, what your learning objectives are for those trainings, and who the target audience is, all that stuff. Coaching sessions. So one thing I'll kind of add to that is that we do offer both individual coaching as well as small group coaching. Small group, we kind of see as approximately 8 participants. But again, it really depends on what the need is and what you're hoping to get out of it. And then for consulting and technical assistance, this is more things like reviewing policies and procedures. So we will have less face-to-face time. It'll be more kind of us providing feedback on documents or helping create documents. And obviously, talking a lot about kind of what you're hoping to get out of that process. I keep losing my cursor. There it is. Okay. So catalog of services, the purpose areas. Like Rachel said, we break these down into 5 different purpose areas. And these were areas that were kind of indicated based on the OVS needs assessment from 2020, yes. Okay. Too many twos in that. Also within past iterations of TARP, what were the highly requested areas, as well as their own experiences in the field and kind of recognizing what buckets of technical assistance might be most helpful for the field. When you're submitting, though, you also have an option to select a topic that's not listed here because we recognize that these 5 buckets are not going to capture everything. And we want to make sure that we are supporting you in the best way that we can in whatever challenges that you might be facing. So just to go in a little bit more depth about these different purpose areas. The first one is trauma-informed organizations. So these trainings are really designed to move beyond just providing trauma-informed care to clients, which I know you all are wonderful at doing. You work with clients on the daily and do a great job at that. But rather really thinking about how can we make the organization as a whole trauma informed and equip staff with the necessary skills to ensure that it's not just the direct client interaction, but also how the overall organization sort of culture and workplace culture. You'll see here that these are the sort of current 3 offerings that we have within this bucket. When you're requesting it, you can select 1A, 1B, et cetera, and you'll see how they're labeled in the other sections as well. And again, these are customizable. So these are just kind of broad topics, and we can combine things as needed. It's really up to you and what you need. Next, we have organizational sustainability. So we recognize that particularly related to the pandemic and sort of the ongoing challenges that many victim assistance programs are facing because of that. This purpose area is really aiming to help kind of reinforce the foundation that community-based organizations and nonprofits have to adapt to these challenges. You all have so many strengths in your programs and agencies, and this is really to help enhance that and make it sustainable in the long term. So whether that is things like strategic planning or talking about things like evaluation, which I know can be scary, but how can we make those things accessible and easy to understand so that way you can demonstrate to funders and to private foundations and donors and all of those kinds of things to show that your program is worth investing in. And also things like grant writing, all of that kind of stuff. The third purpose area that we have is leadership and supervision. This one is pretty straightforward, I think, really sort of supporting both current leadership, but also emerging leaders on how to become better leaders and supervisors for your staff. One thing that I think I'm really passionate about within this bucket or purpose area rather, is making sure that we are reaching not just current leadership, but potential leadership. Because we recognize that in order to make organizations sustainable, kind of tying it back into that previous purpose area, is that we need to support emerging leaders and help them grow. So that way you as an organization have upcoming leaders, and also staff are feeling like they're valued and are able to sort of grow in their own career. So lots of different options within this area. And this is a really great purpose area for some of that small group coaching. So maybe having a coaching group with new supervisors so they have a space together to come together and talk about what are the challenges of transitioning from just a frontline direct service staff to a supervisor where I have more responsibilities, and how can we support each other and help make that transition smoother. Next up, we have engagement and outreach. So engagement and outreach, a big thing with many victim assistance programs is how to actually reach those who need our services. So thinking about how can we make this more kind of grassroots, engage with the community, and do it in a way that's going to center equity and anti-oppression to make sure that those who are disproportionately affected by violence are being reached. And we're doing so in a way that is intentional, focused on social justice and all those other values that we as a field have to make sure that the way we're going about engagement and outreach is going to be effective and responsive to the needs of the community. And there are lots of different ones in here as well, ranging from what we're going to talk about today in this part 2 of how to actually develop survivor engagement models to things like community needs assessment and kind of everything in between. The last purpose area that we have is program development. So this purpose area really focuses on tangible skills for program staff on how to either create new programs or help enhance existing programs. So basic things like project management. I know when I was in the field, I had zero training on project management, and it was really overwhelming to figure out how do I run a program when I don't understand how to kind of manage all those moving parts of a program. So supporting staff and figuring out how to navigate those processes, things like strategic planning, but for programs, and how do you kind of match what a program needs with the larger agency strategic plan and kind of lining those things up. Also things like looking at evidence-based interventions, prevention programming, all those kinds of things that might be useful for your program. So I'm going to briefly stop screen sharing so I can pull up the request form and we can walk through that. So the request form
I have a quick question before we move forward. I see we have some people in the audience who I know have used TARP before. And just throughout this, if you wanted to make a note of it either in the chat or the Q&A, just what your experience was, and maybe let people who may not have used it know the kinds of things that you did. That might be a great way to show people what they might be able to expect through one of these training requests.
Thank you so much for that, Rachel. And I am definitely, since I'm screen sharing, it's hard for me to see the chat and Q&A, so I definitely appreciate you kind of jumping in for that. So for the submission form, we have it in PDF form right here for now, just to make it easier for screen sharing, but the submission form itself is in SurveyMonkey. So on the first page, you'll see just kind of basic information about the program. And then the first page where you actually start filling out information is all your basic kind of contact information, pretty straightforward. Like Rachel mentioned, in terms of eligibility, only program directors and executive directors are able to submit requests. So number 4, that should be the person who's filling it out, their contact information. But if there ever is an instance where there's going to be another project lead who's going to be directly working with us at ISLG on implementing the project and planning it, then you can put their information in this section right here. And then we'll get kind of into the more meat of the request form. So for the statement of need, the more detail you provide for us, the more helpful it's going to be, especially if you're able to provide some examples of what kind of challenge you're facing or what you're hoping to get out of it, whatever it might be. So that way we can come into the first planning meeting that we have with you with some ideas of how to best address that problem, or identify areas for growth or whatever it might be. And then we would also like to know if you received training or technical assistance on that area before, just so we can know what has and hasn't worked. It's by no means a good or bad thing one way or the other. We just want to know, so that way, if you have tried something before and it didn't work, we can know that up front and come up with other ideas of something that may work or have a different approach on hand. Next is where you'll actually select the subject area from the catalog of services. So you are able to select multiple topics. We limited it at 3 just to, kind of help control things and keep things focused on specific challenges or issues that you might be facing, but definitely feel free to select up to those 3. And then you're also able to select, we're not sure what we need, because sometimes it's really hard to see what the challenge is or what you need to fix whatever solution is when you're in the middle of it. So that's totally fine if you select that. If you do, we just ask that you really focus on providing that detail in that statement of need on the previous question to make sure that we're able to come in with some ideas and suggestions of what might work. And then you're also able to select another topic not listed here. If you select that, it might take a little bit longer to implement, because that means we don't necessarily have the training materials or whatever might be on hand. And in some cases, it might not be something we can do in-house, but in that case, we would look to see what other resources are available or see if there are alternatives that we can do in-house. We'll work with you to create the best solution possible. But definitely feel free to use for that another topic not listed here, and we will do what we can to make it happen. And then also, if you do select multiple topics, just a brief explanation of why you think multiple topics are going to be useful. That's helpful for us just to kind of see if you already have a vision of how you see these different topics being combined, or if they just sounded interesting, or maybe you're trying to address 2 different problems and that's why you selected 2, whatever it might be, just so we can know and plan accordingly. For the time frame, nothing is guaranteed. All of it we're going to do as best as we can. A lot of it is just depend on what resources are available at the time of submission. But if you do select this is urgent, just explain why it's urgent so we can understand and help prioritize in case there are 20 VAPs selecting urgent requests all at the same time. So that way we can really help make sure that all agencies are getting what they need in a timely manner. I'll also put in information about delivery format, so whether it's in person or remote or hybrid. In person is going to be dependent on available resources as well as health and safety measures, but it's definitely an option if anyone would like that. Also, the modalities that we went over earlier, whether you want training, coaching, whatever it might be, or hybrid. And if you do select hybrid, just let us know what specifics you're kind of looking for within that, whether that's a training followed by some coaching, or maybe it's coaching and some consulting and technical assistance, whatever combination of things, just specify. So again, we can come into those planning meetings prepared with some options for you. And then for service length, pretty straightforward. For other, there are definitely cases where maybe you want a full day, the equivalent of a full day training, but schedule wise, that doesn't make sense. So maybe instead you want to break it up into 3 or 4 2-hour trainings or whatever it might be. So just specify what you kind of envision for that other if you have a unique situation like that. And then also information about the total number of staff, as well as the types of staff. So direct service, administrative, leadership, or other. For ADA accommodations, we definitely want to do what we can to meet those. If we know that ahead of time, that's great. You can also let us know during the planning phase. If you don't know when at the time of submitting, we'll definitely check in with that throughout the planning while we're creating the proposal for the project. So that way, when we actually get to the implementation phase, we can meet those needs as best as we can. And then any other information that you think might be useful for us to know, and then you submit it. So pretty straightforward. I see some questions in the chat and things like that. Were there anything that we needed to kind of pause and address before we move on? Let's see. I see some testimonials. That's wonderful. Thank you. Okay. I'm going to keep going because I don't see any specific questions off the top. Just skimming those. So I'm going to reshare and we'll dive back in. So for the proposal development, we will initially meet with you to talk about what it is you need, better understand the context of your organization, what you're hoping to get out of it, what your staff need, all that kind of stuff. So that way we can then develop a proposal. And you will have a chance to review proposals before we submit it to OVS for final approval. And then within the proposal, that's going to include project description, such as any learning objectives, it's a training, what the scope is, all of that kind of stuff, as well as number and length of whether it's a training or coaching session, what are the topics and outcome for each of those sessions, and if especially for technical assistance, any relevant deliverables. So whether that's written feedback on policies, a strategic plan template, or whatever other sort of deliverables might be relevant to that proposal, all of that will be outlined, as well as timeline for implementation. Those are going to be estimates, and they're not going to include specific dates. Dates will be scheduled after final approval from OVS. But we want to give you a time sense of if it's training consulting, or sorry, it's technical assistance and consulting, then we'll kind of let you know, like, oh, we think this deliverable will take us 2 to 3 weeks to create, or whatever it might be, just so you have clear expectations of what that might look like. And I'll also say that, sometimes we understand VAPs are busy, life happens. If after 15 business days, we haven't sort of gotten a response about scheduling those planning meetings or reviewing the proposal, we may end up having to cancel the request. That doesn't mean you're not able to submit another request. We do want to work with you. It's just sometimes if there are a lot of projects kind of building up, we do kind of need to stay on top of things like that. So just keep that in mind. The quicker you respond, the quicker we'll likely be able to get to the project. All right, so providing feedback. Like Rachel said, all projects under TARP are going to have evaluations at the end. So 2 to 5 minute survey, super quick and easy. We would really appreciate if you do it not only for reporting purposes to the funders, but also for us improving the program. And we really want to make sure that this program is responsive to what you need and going to be useful for you. We don't want to have things in our catalog or webinars that aren't actually useful or relevant. So please fill out those feedback, the evaluation surveys, so we can know what we're doing and help sort of develop a better catalog of services. We do update the catalog of services every 6 months. So we can add in new things based on feedback from these surveys and all of that stuff. All right, so now we are going to pause for any questions. Great, I'm just getting caught up on the chat.
We are monitoring. If people are
Okay.
chatting into the hosts and presenters, we see them, we will read them out loud.
Okay.
We also are looking at the Q&A section and questions are being answered there. So we'll give people a few minutes to think about their questions. While we wait, I do want to make sure it's really clear that this isn't a one and done sort of thing. If your program has multiple needs, you're welcome to submit multiple requests. You don't have to get all of your needs met in one. I know there is someone on this call who was a super user of the last iteration of this program, and I think their program had maybe 5 or 6 different trainings throughout the course of the contract. So don't be shy. We do review each project request individually, but it's not do it once, never again. If you have a great training and you want to build on that, you can always request more TARP. We want it to be used. We will open up trainings until we don't have funding left. So please put us in that position to say we have no more money left. We'd rather that than leaving money on the table.
Thanks for all that, Rachel. So we'll give it another minute or so to see if any questions come in. I see one. What happens if the training is approved and then unable to be implemented? I'm not quite sure what you mean by unable to be implemented. Let's see, hold on. Our agency has a unit that's funded by OVS. This training is provided for only staff in that unit. Okay, so I'll answer that second one. It can be open to all agency staff. So the OVS funding program has to be the one requesting it. But if it's relevant to other staff within the agency, that's fine. For the unable.
Just one moment, Talon, with that. What I would say is when you submit, just make that clear, because when we look through, we might say this program only has 6 people. Why are 12 people being noted? If we have questions or if there are any, clarification needed, we'll go through that process in the approval stage.
Thanks. And yeah, getting back to this unable to be implemented, we will work with you to make sure it's implemented. As long as the program is being responsive, we will make sure it's implemented. If it's scheduling challenges, we will be as flexible as we can on our end. If there's some other challenge that's making it difficult to implement for whatever reason, we'll work together to figure out a plan to kind of fix whatever the issue is. But if you had a more kind of specific example of what you're envisioning for why it might not be implemented, feel free to, for scheduling, you will let us know when you're available for scheduling and we will do our best to meet that need. Again, we want to be as flexible as we can within reason, so definitely feel free to let us know. Okay, so a lot of questions got answered. Wonderful. Anything else? I'll also say that right after this, we are going to have a very short little 5-minute break before switching gears into the part 2 on survivor engagement models. So if you think of any questions during that break, feel free to let us know. Okay, so on that note, we will go ahead. Oh, I see another question. Is there a training schedule already in place? For the webinars that are open to all victim assistance programs, we are working on that training schedule for 2023. For individual VAPs, you need to put in the request for those to get scheduled. And we are very much looking forward to getting those requests. Can you include other VAPs? This is absolutely open to all OVS-funded VAPs. So if there are multiple VAPs that you want to kind of have a project together, then that's totally fine. There would, I believe, and Rachel, correct me if I'm wrong in this, there would need to be kind of one requesting agency just to like keep things clear and organized. But you could absolutely kind of note that in the request form in the like other section, just so we know, and then we can include them in the planning process as well.
Absolutely. I would recommend that you have one agency lead. They're submitting it. It will be tied to that agency, but in that statement of need, you would put, we also plan to include members of this group. If you have their OVS contract number, that's excellent to share, but you wouldn't have multiple agencies requesting the same training if they're all going to be there. You would have one request. And I would say all of this feels very formal as we go through and are developing the project proposal and working when Talen's team is working with us and Talen's team is working with you, this information can be fleshed out so that the proposal that we finally get is exactly what is needed.
I saw another question. Is there a listserv for directors? Rachel, do you have the answer to that?
So we have a training listserv that anybody can sign up for. If I will send the information to signing up for that. Regarding a specific listserv for directors, I would need a little bit more information. So please feel free to clarify on that and I'll look into it for you.
Okay, so let's go ahead and take a break. So it is 1:44. So let's just round up and say we will resume at 1:50 for this part 2, developing meaningful survivor engagement models. And we'll also take a minute before we dive into that to answer any lingering questions that might come up during the break. So we are going to go ahead and mute ourselves, encourage you to use the bathroom, grab some water, whatever, and we will see you in a few minutes. Right, so it is 1:50, so we will go ahead and get started. Again, I'm not seeing any questions that came in over the break about TARP. So we'll, hold on, I just might have spoken to, Justin, welcome back. So we'll go ahead and dive straight on into the developing meaningful survivor engagement models training, kind of mini training. And if you do have any follow-up questions for TARP, definitely please feel free to reach out. OVS, we can reach them. I believe their contact information is on the TARP website. So definitely feel free to reach out if you have any questions about anything after the training, or there's their email, even better. Great. So this mini session, developing meaningful survivor engagement models, that is a mouthful, is really designed to give a high level overview of what these models might look like, define some key terms, and really just give a preview of what a TARP training might look like. If this is a topic that you're interested in, or you want help as an organization with actually developing some of these models within your organization, definitely feel free to submit a request. This is a topic in the catalog. I love talking about this stuff, so please feel free to let us know if you want to talk about it more. So when we're talking about survivor engagement, it's really a form of community engagement that we're talking about. So what we mean by community engagement, I love this quote from the CDC, or definition from the CDC: the process of working collaboratively with and through groups of people affiliated by geographic proximity, special interests, or similar situations to address issues affecting the well-being of those people. It involves partnerships and coalitions that help mobilize resources and influence systems, change relationships among partners, and serve as catalysts for changing policies, programs, and practices. And so survivor engagement is a particular form of community engagement that, broadly speaking, we're aiming to improve prevention, violence prevention, and response efforts by intentionally engaging with those who are impacted by violence and crime. And real quick, one thing I'll mention, I'm using the term survivor here. I recognize that a lot of folks use the term survivor and victim interchangeably. Some people prefer one over the other. I personally think survivor tends to be more strengths-based and strengths-focused, and that's really at the center of what community engagement, in whatever form we're talking about, should inherently be strengths-based, and recognizing the strengths of working with the community and the strengths that they bring to this work. So that is why I'm using the term survivor here, but I recognize not everyone uses that term, and that's okay. I'll also say that survivor engagement and also community engagement as a whole is really a spectrum. So what it's going to look like is going to vary from program to program, depending on what the mission and vision of the agency is. What are the contextual factors, like their organizational capacity or geographic area? Doing survivor engagement in New York City is going to look very different than doing survivor engagement in rural upstate New York. And so it's really about sort of being responsive to what your community looks like, what your agency resources are, etc. So why does survivor engagement matter? Programs that if intentionally and effectively engage survivors can essentially be more responsive to survivors' needs. We, especially the past couple of years, have been in an ever-changing world. So much has changed in the past 2.5 years, and we have to be able to be responsive to that. There's so many factors like location, demographics, what type of victimization someone experienced, and being able to engage directly with survivors helps us understand those contextual factors of the communities that we serve and how we can be culturally responsive, how we can be responsive to those needs. I'll also add that a lot of times programs really emphasize research-based and evidence-based practices, which is great. It has its place, I'm not denying that. But also research and evidence-based practice takes time to develop. I've seen many studies that are just being published this year that gathered data in 2015 or so. And so a lot has changed since 2015, such as the pandemic. And so community engagement, survivor engagement is essentially, I view it as almost a way to kind of help fill those gaps and address that lag that evidence-based practice often has in reaching the field. And oftentimes, a lot of communities are underrepresented within research. So again, it helps fill those gaps. Communities of color, rural communities, LGBTQ folks, disabled folks, etc. These are all communities that are not often represented in research, especially within the victim service field. So being able to engage directly with those folks, you're almost kind of essentially doing your own research and figuring out what is going to work for our specific community, because there might not be research that tells you what's going to work for that specific community in the current sort of context and time frame that you're in. And I'll also say that a lot of times when working with survivors often feel safer talking with other survivors than professionals in the field. There's so many power dynamics that show up in a sort of therapist-survivor relationship, or an advocate-survivor relationship, or case manager-survivor. All those power dynamics show up and can make survivors feel unsafe for a variety of reasons, often to no fault of the actual provider their own, but rather just systems of oppression and past experiences, etc. And so having effective survivor engagement models can be a way to help kind of liaise with the community and help build up that trust and address those power dynamics so survivors feel safer engaging with your program. Survivor engagement can also provide various opportunities for skill building and professional development and help enhance career opportunities. There are a lot of really neat ways to do that, whether it's through working groups and having them help sort of develop training and curriculum, and that's a skill that you can put on a resume. So survivor engagement can also almost become a program in and of itself if done effectively. And I also just love this quote. I've seen it attributed to many different people, and it's unclear where it originally came from, but nothing about us without us, and really just centering survivors in the work that we do and remembering that our programs wouldn't be here if there wasn't a need for survivors. So their needs should really be at the center of everything that we do. So these are just a handful of kind of broad principles of survivor engagement. And obviously there are many more, and there are a lot of nuances in all of these. We won't be able to get into all the detail of these today, but just kind of briefly touch on them. Diversity and inclusion. I love that someone asked a question about in the Q&A about, do we integrate anti-racist principles into our work? Yes, absolutely. We do our best. We're not perfect. And so recognizing, what is the role of diversity, not only diversity and inclusion, but anti-oppression within this work, and how are we integrating that into our survivor engagement to make it as equitable and safe as possible? Intentional participation and collaboration. A really big thing, and we'll talk more about this in a minute, within survivor engagement is making sure that the way we're going about it is true engagement and not just tokenization. It is a collaborative process. It should be mutually beneficial, etc. And that really comes from intentional relationship building and making sure that all sides are being heard and that people are able to sort of speak their minds and share what their needs are. Accountability and community-driven action. A lot of times when we hear accountability, people think of harm was caused. How can we hold someone accountable for that harm? And that is absolutely part of this here. But we're also talking about following through on action items, making sure that the information and data essentially that is gathered from survivor engagement is going to then be implemented and put to use to improve programs and services and help prevent and create better response systems to violence. So that's what we mean by accountability, holding people accountable to what they say they're going to do and making sure that there are systems in place so that everyone is able to do that in a way that is accessible and manageable for them. Commitment to community. That might seem kind of obvious because these are also principles of broader community engagement that ISLG uses within our framework, but commitment to community is so huge because, again, these people are the center of what we do. So we have to be genuinely committed to making sure that we're listening to their voices and making sure that they feel supported and safe in whatever our engagement models might look like. Transparency and trust, pretty straightforward, but also incredibly important. If survivors don't know what's happening behind the scenes, or if they don't know how the things that they share and the feedback that they give is being used, then they're not necessarily going to trust your program. So making sure that you have ways to share information back and forth, make sure that they know what is being done with their information when they give feedback, when you through these engagement efforts. So just having that transparency and doing what you can to build up trust in these relationships. And a lot of times that takes time, and that's okay. Survivor engagement is not something that you just start doing one day and then magically your program improves. It takes a lot of work and a lot of time, but the benefits of it are so worth it when it's done effectively. Sustainability. A big part of survivor engagement is making sure that it is sustainable for the program and also the survivors involved. So part of that is, when possible, compensating survivors or having some type of benefit available to them, making sure that it is built into the program structure and not just a one-off event that gets forgotten in 2 months. So really having it be a sustainable, ongoing part of your program to be truly meaningful. And lastly, openness to innovation and learning. A lot of times people get stuck in their old ways. I've done it, everyone does it, it happens. So really being intentional about listening to new ideas and being willing to try new things can be such a critical part of survivor engagement to ensure that you're able to effectively implement ideas and not just continue the same old, same old. All right, so safety and survivor engagement. I think this is something that kind of crosses all of those different principles that we just talked about. And it's, in my opinion, one of the most important aspects of survivor engagement, while also recognizing that safety is something that is very hard to achieve. We can never guarantee complete safety, but we can guarantee that we will do our best to make things as safe as possible. A lot of that is going to really come down to reflection on an organizational level to make sure that you are asking yourselves the right questions and identifying what challenges that you might have with this. So thinking about, how have survivors been treated within our organization and the broader field in the past? Thinking about both positive and negatives and reflecting on those. How can we enhance the positives and how can we learn from the negatives? And thinking about it not just within your organization, but in the field at large, I think is really important, because even if there's a magical unicorn agency out there that has never done anything wrong, all their staff are perfect humans, survivors are still going to see that organization in potentially the not so greatest light because they might have bad experiences at other organizations that aren't magical unicorn organizations. So really being aware of what are the patterns in the larger field and how might those kind of expectations and assumptions be impacting how survivors are experiencing the space that we are creating right here. Also thinking about, how are we preventing and responding to harms and triggers? As you all know, survivors often come with a host of challenges and triggers because of the violence that they experience. So really being intentional about, what safety measures are we putting in place? What processes do we have to support folks to really create an environment where people are ideally not being triggered in the first place, but if they are, what are we doing to support them and make sure that it doesn't happen again, and making sure that they get the support that they need to manage that trigger moving forward. Thinking about, how are we navigating power dynamics in survivor engagement? Again, like I mentioned earlier, there are so many power dynamics that show up between agency staff at all levels and survivors. And that's not a bad thing. Power dynamics are part of human relationships. It doesn't have to be a bad thing. We just have to be aware of it and think about, how can we help mitigate this and navigate it in a way that is going to center anti-oppression, center survivor needs, and really make sure that we are doing what the survivor needs and making sure that we are following through with that, not just in theory, but in practice. And that ties into this last point of enhancing equity and anti-oppression. So a lot of times when people do survivor engagement, there's a tendency to kind of hold survivors to the same standards as professionals in the field. And that there are times and places for that in certain forms of survivor engagement. And then there are times where that's not appropriate. There's a lot of really great resources out there talking about how professionalism is related to things like racism, ableism, transphobia, and all those types of things. So how are we making sure that we are addressing that within what we're expecting from survivors through our engagement efforts? And again, thinking about, what are the larger patterns within the victim service field and how is that impacting our program and agency? Oftentimes, programs think they're doing survivor engagement. And this is true across the country, but they're just tokenizing. So being intentional about what are we doing to ensure that we are not just tokenizing, but rather creating truly meaningful survivor engagement models. So understanding the distinction between tokenization and engagement is really critical here. Tokenization is going to be superficial. You're doing it to kind of check a box, say that we did it, and then move on. And there's not really sort of a genuine desire to make changes in your program and in your services based on the feedback you receive. It's going to be very kind of one-sided. We get the information, we say we did it, and move on. Versus meaningful survivor engagement, there's going to be collaborative efforts. There's going to be mutually beneficial results. There's going to be a lot of intentionality put into the planning and execution of survivor engagement. And again, that follow-through piece. So that meaningful change piece is so huge because again, we want to make sure that change is happening from this. Otherwise, it's not engagement, it is tokenization. We want to make sure that what we are doing with survivors is worth their time and going to improve the field as a whole and what we're able to offer as an individual agency. And lastly, making sure that it's operationalized. So again, going back to that sustainability piece, how are we building it into the fabric of our organization? So that way it's ongoing, it's an ongoing process. Survivor engagement is something that some models of it might have a kind of natural end to it, and that's okay. But there should always be some type of ongoing survivor engagement rather than just these sporadic one-off events or initiatives. So that way it is constantly improving your organization. And again, it's a lot of work. I'm not saying this is easy. It's a lot easier said than done, but these are all really important things to be thinking about as you think about what you want your survivor engagement model to look like. This is a graphic from the CDC. There are a ton of different ways you can kind of conceptualize the spectrum of survivor engagement or community engagement. This one is specifically towards community engagement, but it's very relevant to survivor engagement as well. And I think it does a good job of giving kind of a high-level overview of what this spectrum can look like. So it goes over what community involvement looks like, what communication and information sharing is, what is the relationship between the two entities. In our case here, victim assistance programs and survivors, what does that relationship look like through engagement? And what are the outcomes of that engagement? Another thing I would add to this graphic is decision-making power. So thinking about what level of decision-making power, if any, do survivors have through your survivor engagement models, and really being intentional and aware of what those are and setting expectations. It's not always necessary or appropriate to have survivors in these different models have decision-making power, but you should be upfront about what they do and don't have decision-making power over. I'll also say, to be clear, being on the right side of the spectrum, the more collaborative shared leadership side of the spectrum, is not inherently better than being on the left side. Where an organization falls on the spectrum is going to be highly dependent on a number of factors like resources, geography, what their mission and vision is, and that's okay. Not all organizations are meant to be all the way at that shared leadership model. Every org is going to have a different mission and vision, et cetera. So it's more important to be intentional about where you are and doing effective engagement at whatever level you're at, rather than just trying to kind of move up the spectrum just for the sake of moving along the spectrum. So while I think graphics like this are really useful to help you kind of reflect where are we as an organization, but it's also not the end all be all. And you also don't need to feel like you need to kind of be at a certain place. It's just a useful reflection tool. See, I can see a couple things in the chat. Yes, so slides are available. So these are just a handful of examples of what survivor engagement models might look like. There are many more, and even within these examples, there are many different ways that it can show up. So advisory councils, generally speaking, advisory councils provide kind of overarching feedback on the direction of an organization. Generally, they have some type of decision-making power, whether or not that is at the organizational level, maybe it's just decision-making power on how they bring ideas forward to the organization or whatever it might be. Typically, these memberships are closed. There's generally some type of like application or nomination process. And members generally have a kind of longer term appointment. Obviously, it varies, but I would say most are probably like a year or longer. So the main difference between advisory councils and sort of something more like listening sessions or focus groups is that it is ongoing feedback. It is integrated in to the structure of an organization through these advisory councils. Listening sessions and focus groups are more kind of one-off activities or a series of activities focused on a particular topic or issue rather than the organization as a whole. And generally they're kind of a wider audience as long as they meet whatever criteria you have for the listening session or focus group, then people are welcome to come. Whereas again, advisory councils are more kind of closed membership. Feedback and evaluation surveys, we're all familiar with these. These do not have to be a formal program evaluation. It can be, but it can also just be a super simple sort of customer satisfaction type survey. You don't have to be overwhelmed by doing this. Sometimes just doing something really simple can help you reflect on where are we currently at. There are tons of different ways to gather this information. The main things is that you want to make sure you're actually doing something with the information you gather. Even in a super simple, are you satisfied? Yes or no? If you get mostly no's, you may not know why that is a no, but you have that information. And then that can help you kind of identify what you need to do next. Working groups. So specific projects, working groups really focus on specific projects. So whether that be writing a curriculum or facilitating community needs assessment or whatever it might be. And so working groups are a really great way to kind of help focus in on and get work done on a particular topic. And generally there's a lot of decision-making power within that particular topic, but not necessarily sort of other aspects of the program or organization. And then the last example is peer/credible messenger programs. These are becoming incredibly common in a number of different fields, including the victim service field. So mentor programs are really common example of this. Maybe it's survivors providing community education for a prevention program. And the survivors providing that direct service, that is definitely kind of, this is a model that you definitely want to be a more sort of paid formal model of survivor engagement, whereas some of the others, there's more kind of creativity and ways that you can approach compensation for that. And again, these are not exhaustive, but just to give a handful of examples. So a few considerations to think about as you're developing survivor engagement models. First, what level of disclosure makes sense? Different types of engagement are going to kind of require different levels of disclosure. Not all survivors are comfortable sort of publicly sharing their survivor status. So maybe an advisory council is a public-facing advisory council where they liaise between the community or the organization, and it's known that this is an advisory council made up of survivors. That might not be a good fit for all survivors if they don't want to be in a public-facing role, if they don't want the world to know that they're a survivor. But something like a feedback survey is much easier, more accessible. And there's nothing good or bad about one or the other. It's just important to know and think about what kind of disclosure are we expecting for this survivor engagement. So that way we can then manage expectations, be upfront about that. So that way survivors know kind of what they're signing up for, so to speak. And also thinking about what are the challenges and strengths for this level of disclosure, and how can we mitigate those challenges and strengths. Having something more public facing, whether it's a public facing advisory council or maybe it's a public facing working group or whatever it might be, that can be really powerful in many ways. There's a lot of strength and storytelling and having survivors share that, but it can also easily turn into tokenization. So really just kind of reflecting on those things and being mindful so that way, as you start to implement them, you can figure out what is going to work best for your organization and be intentional about it. Some engagement models are going to be volunteered, some paid. If we lived in an ideal world, all survivor engagement models would be compensated, but we don't live in an ideal world. We have limited resources. So unfortunately, that's not always feasible. But in instances when it's not feasible, what kind of alternative benefits can we give? You want to make sure that survivor engagement is never a one-way street. So are we going to give them professional development training? Or like, for instance, if you have a working group where they're developing curriculum, that is a marketable skill. So not only how are we helping them develop that skill, but then how are we helping them market and figure out what can we do with this skill to help improve our career, et cetera. So lots of different creative ways that you can kind of give some type of benefit, even if it's not monetary. So really being mindful of making sure that it is mutually beneficial. And one of the biggest considerations to make is also just what are the barriers to engagement? This is obviously going to vary depending on what type of engagement you're looking at, but things like childcare, transportation, safety, work schedule, are there appropriate accommodations, language barriers? These are just a handful of examples. There are tons more. And again, it really depends on the specific project. But whatever these barriers are, you should reflect on them and think about what can we do to mitigate these barriers, and really kind of think through how can we mitigate the barriers and do it in a way that is going to not create further barriers. So sometimes you resolve one issue, another issue crops up. So really being intentional to make sure that your solutions are not creating further barriers. And also recognizing that sometimes there are kind of competing accommodations almost, where one person's solution to a barrier creates a barrier for another person. So thinking about how can we kind of hold those nuances. So just to kind of wrap it up before we open the floor up to questions, when we think about building capacity for survivor engagement, one of the first things that you want to do, and this is something that we are able to help with through TARP, is assessing your organization's readiness. Every organization, again, is going to be at a different sort of spot along that spectrum. And so recognizing where are we now, where do we want to go, and why do we want to go there? And then starting to think about what are strategies that can help us get there. And that is something, again, we can help with, whether it is through a training or through technical assistance to help kind of work through what might an advisory council look like, what might a working group look like, et cetera. And thinking about what is and isn't working. So that way we can identify new strategies for engagement, think about what resources we currently have, what are needed, how can we acquire those resources, et cetera. Developing effective outreach plans is another huge need within engagement outreach. It's one thing to have a phenomenal engagement plan and strategy, but then if you're not able to actually reach the people who you want to engage, then that it's not going to go anywhere. So how are we identifying and reaching survivors so that way we can actually engage them, and doing it in a way that, again, is not tokenizing, is going to be centering anti-oppression, is going to make sure that we're reaching the most vulnerable survivors and not just those who we already serve, but how can we make sure that we are reaching the corners of our communities that we're not currently reaching. Developing facilitation plans. So again, you can have the most wonderful plan in the world, but if you don't have plans for how are we actually going to facilitate this in a way that is going to center safety, make it transparent, build trust in those relationships, then it's not, you're not going to be able to actually implement it. And then lastly, operationalizing survivor engagement strategies. So again, how are we building it into the fabric of an organization to make it an ongoing effort rather than just kind of one-off events? And again, these are all things that we are able to help with TARP. So I really look forward to seeing what requests you have, whether it's on this topic within one of these areas or something else, a different topic entirely. Very much looking forward to it. Those are just the references, and that is the end of the formal webinar. I would love to see what questions folks have. So yeah, I'll give folks a minute to type in any questions in the chat or Q&A. Yes, thank you so much, Lauren, for bringing that up. Lauren said a lot of people enter this field as professionals after experiencing victimization. What is recommended on identifying those voices where the professional may not want to share and or be defined by the survivor experience? Yes, I think that's something that it's really going to depend on what you're wanting to kind of get out of the survivor engagement. So if it's something like a peer or credible messenger program where survivor status is kind of built into the expectation of the role, and having that lived experience, that's something you need to be upfront about, and kind of making sure that we are not lessening those experiences. A lot of times there is a tendency to kind of prioritize professional experiences over lived experiences. So making sure that we are creating kind of an equitable workplace for valuing both types of experiences. And in roles where, you know, maybe it's not relevant to the role, or not relevant, it's not required for the role. I think lived experience and bringing that survivor voice can be useful in all roles. But if it's not at the forefront of the role, then being really mindful about how are we creating an environment that is trauma informed, so that way all staff feel safe here and feel welcome here, whether or not we know that they're survivors. I think it's important to remember that trauma-informed care should be the default everywhere, and that includes trauma-informed workplaces, and creating an environment where even if we are not aware of survivor status, survivors feel safe, and we're able to kind of reap the benefits of having that trauma-informed care, even if it's not something that's open. Trauma-informed care, I think there's an assumption that you have to be like a trauma-focused organization. It has to be with folks who you know have experienced trauma, but trauma-informed care is not going to hurt anyone, even if they haven't experienced trauma. And the reality is, we're humans, we've all experienced some sort of trauma. So being able to be really mindful and responsive to that, I think, is really important. So I know that answer was kind of all over the place, but hopefully it helped answer that question. And yeah, you also just want to make sure that you're not sort of pressuring staff to disclose if they don't want to disclose. That should be something that is voluntary, and they should only do it if they feel ready to do it. Any other questions that folks have? Oh, someone has a raised hand. I did not catch that. Thank you, Rachel. All right, I believe I can unmute you. So yeah, I'm gonna let you allow to talk. So you should be able to say whatever comment or ask whatever question you may have. Modesta, I'm not sure if I'm saying your hand right, but if you can hear me and would like to speak, feel free to. You should be able to unmute now. If not, no worries. Okay. Might have just been an accident and they did not mean to raise a hand. All right, anything else? If not, we can go ahead and wrap up. Any questions related to broader OVS TARP things, definitely feel free to reach out to that training email that Rachel dropped in the chat earlier. If you have any questions about this topic on survivor engagement, please feel free to submit a request, and we would love to come talk to you more about it and help you develop those models. But thank you. Oh, hold on, I see a Q&A. How do you navigate a staff's automatic need to gatekeep how survivors can engage because of their fear that survivor isn't ready? Who gets to define readiness? I love that question. So I think a lot of it is really kind of unlearning some assumptions about what readiness looks like. I think when we start to kind of determine like who is or isn't ready, that can be really messy. That's where a lot of biases can come in. So I think it's less about focusing on, is this survivor ready from a survivor lens, but rather, are they just ready for the job? Like you would assess for any other job position. Are they ready to do this job? Can they do this job? Do they have the skills to do this job? And if they don't have the skills, then do they have other skills that maybe kind of outweigh and we're able to train up on those skills? So I think it's really about moving away from the idea that survivors aren't ready and really focusing on how are we just assessing readiness to do a job, period. So hopefully that answered your question. And to answer the second part, who gets to define readiness? In my opinion, the survivor is the one who gets to define readiness. And if there's ever a moment where, you know, things are starting to kind of interfere with their work, focus on what is the challenge with the work and less on the survivor status. How can we make sure that we're getting them the resources that they need to do the job successfully? Because at the end of the day, it's less about survivor status and more about doing whatever job it is, whether it's an advocate role or a leadership role or whatever it might be. Right. Well, thank you so much, everyone. This was great. I'm not sure if anyone from OVS or ISLG has any final words that they would like to say, but we look forward to receiving everyone's requests, and we will talk to everyone soon.
Thank you very much, everyone. This was fabulous. You will, I think when you X out of this, you'll be directed to the evaluation. We're also going to pop it into the chat, and when I send my follow-up email, we'll include it there. The evaluations, I know it's the last thing you want to do. It's really helpful. It helps us build better programs. So please take a few minutes to complete that. And please, please, please utilize this program. This is free training. It is free stuff. It helps you run better. We know that it can be hard to know what you need, but you're in great hands with the ISLG team. So we're looking forward to getting those requests pouring in. Tell your friends, tell your other VAPs, please, please, please utilize this program.
Thank you so much, everyone.